Welcome back to A Warrior Spirit, where we let the inner warrior out to shine in their light. Today, I'm honored, and I truly do mean honored, to be with a friend, colleague, and just all-around good-hearted man, Brian Bogert. He is an inspirational, motivational speaker. He's a coach, he's a husband, he's a father, and he's just all-around good human being. So it's truly an honor for you to be here today, and thank you for joining me.
Brother, man, thank you so much. Have always appreciated our time together. So this is just an extension of what's already good. And anytime we can create collective impact, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, I know that, if people see you today, they see a very driven, motivated, high level, high energy guy. But because I do know, part of your story, I've heard your story. It took a little bit for you to get there. You had something horrifically tragic happen to you as a child. How old were you when that occurred?
I was 7.
7. Okay. And how old are you today?
I turned 38 in a few weeks. Your sound went away, brother.
Good.
There you are.
Yeah,
yep,
sorry.
You're back.
I said I got 20
Were you
years.
laughing at my age? Was that what you were laughing at?
No, I was laughing because I got 20 years on you, and it's like you're still a young pup. It's awesome. I literally just got an AARP card in the mail. So
Oh, dude, you're just getting into a different part of life. We're just in different seasons.
I'm getting into the good part. But Brian, when you were 7, can you take us back to that incident that changed your world?
Yeah, it was August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day, and my family and I had just moved back to Arizona. We were doing a home improvement project, and my mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And anybody who knows me, or frankly, for listening even for 2 minutes here, you probably can tell I talk fast. I walk fast, right? I've always had an energy and excitement and a vigor for life, so it didn't surprise them that I was the first one to the car. We get up to the car, but my friend was back in the days before key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally stick her hand in her purse, grab her keys, stick them out, stick them in the door, turn them so we could go on with our way. And while I'm standing there next to the car, waiting for her to unlock the doors, a truck pulls up in front of the store, parks, and the driver and the middle passenger get out. Passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, Daryl, and he scooted over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at me with no time to react. Went up over the median, hit the tree in the median, hit our car, knocks me over, runs over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to sever my left arm completely from my body. My mom and my brother watched the whole thing happen. The next thing my mom hears is my brother's voice saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there." And as she gazes up the lot to look at it, she sees the trail of muscle cooking like hamburger on the asphalt. Now, what I have to pause and always acknowledge is outside of my mother, I'm responsible and alive today for one woman. And this was a woman who walked out of the store right when this took place. And I've said for years that I was forever indebted to her. That became even more meaningful last August when I met her for the very first time on the 30th anniversary, because I always said I was forever indebted to her choice to go into action that day. What's really interesting is she had a friend with her that day that I learned about for the first time. Her friend was also a nurse who was also trained, who chose to go on with her day. And I want to be really clear. I don't have any upset energy or feelings. That was well within her right to do. But the reason I want to impress upon the point is this woman's choice to go into action is what's now led to a ripple effect of millions going towards billions of lives impacted because of a singular moment. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound, saved my life, and she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and fill it with ice. So my detached limb was on ice within minutes, giving me a fighting chance of both. Had she not done one or both of those things, Daryl, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. That's just the reality. And so that's why I have to always honor this woman, because that one action is responsible for so much more. And the last thing I'll say about this story before we jump into questions, because I have to make sure everybody hears this. The more I've done this and the more I've told my story, the more I realize how unique my story is. But what I want to make sure that every single one of you hears out of this is that your story, regardless of the extremities of your story, is your story. And it's your ability to pause long enough to pay attention to the lessons you can extract from your stories so that you become intentional in how you apply them moving forward. We all have the ability to do that. And we all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So all I ask is don't ever minimize your story, because whatever your relative truth is all that matters.
And that's why I created this a warrior spirit, because I heard and I started telling people I was starting to listen to the voices I didn't need medication from. So I heard that I was supposed to give a platform for people to make their mess their message, to make it a survival guide for somebody else. And that's exactly how it's transpired and exactly what it's done. And everyone's had a unique, amazing story to them, but all of them have had courage, triumph, and success. And when I tell these people that if you start telling your story from the triumph version instead of the victim version, your story becomes more powerful and you impact more people. And I got to see firsthand you actually do that a year ago in Nashville, and I've been honored ever since. As most mothers would be, was your mom just paralyzed with shock, or did she jump in to try to help too?
My mom is a warrior and has a warrior spirit. She is one of those that has the ability, regardless of what's going on around her, to block out the external noise and focus on what's in front of her. So she didn't fall apart. She was actually there and paying attention to what obviously I needed and what needed to be happening with my brother and how was this all going to happen. And she held everything together until her dad was able to meet us at the hospital, because back in those days, not everybody had cell phones. My dad got a call, but he was sent to the wrong hospital.
Oh, wow.
Right. He got sent to the wrong hospital 3 times, which delayed multiple hours. And he was trying to track down this story, but didn't have any way to get a hold of us. Right. Wow. And so my mom held it together completely until her dad got there. And then she went away and fell apart a little bit, because every mother is going to need to process that, right?
Absolutely. Now, as a 7-year-old, most I can imagine would be angry and bitter and, knowing how their life was totally altered. Did you go through that normal process, or because of your mother's strength, you were able to fight through that?
Yeah. I'll tell you that I never got to that point early. What I did get and what I remember is, first of all, I think the first 48 hours, I felt like it was a dream. It didn't feel real. And I would tell you that I definitely was between worlds, looking at myself out of body and like in wonder and awe. At least that's how I experienced it and remember it, right? I do remember that once consciousness came back, though, even at 7, I felt sorry for myself, right? I asked, why me? Yep. Right. And those questions on why me, what is my future going to look like? Is my arm even going to be successfully reattached? Will I have use of it at some point that's practical? Is it like, am I ever going to be able to pick my kids up in the air? Like any of it, right? I didn't know, but that didn't last for very long, because I think perspective always points us at what's important. We were in the ICU, obviously, because of the trauma and how extreme it was, how critical my life was in so many moments as they were kind of in those initial days. And so we were surrounded by people that all had kids in the ICU at the same time. And their families started coming up and saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. We're so sorry. This is so traumatic. What can we do to help you? And then we come to find out that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another 30 days.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I do remember settling in to a point of acceptance that I was alive.
Yep.
And that was the most important thing. And whether or not my arm was going to be successfully reattached, I at least had my life. And so that brought in one of my core lessons, which I felt early in that moment, which was I learned not to get stuck by the things that have happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with them. And I believe that moved people move people. And so that's one of the areas that I really extracted that from. But yeah, my parents put a whole lot of different perspective in it and extracted some of my other core lessons from it. I would tell you that anger and other elements of those emotions remained hidden for 20 to 25 years. And then they almost destroyed my life as an adult. And so that's a whole nother story I'm sure we'll get to, but
Yeah, that's it's interesting how, and many of the stories have been told and that I hear, we bury that anger, or we think we've dealt with it because we looked at it, which isn't really healing it. So we set it aside, and then it transforms the rest of our life because it subconsciously drags with us and creates all these conflicts that when we stop and finally pinpoint, oh shit, it was that thing that happened to me when I was 20 years ago, you know.
Yep.
You said something about the ICU, and it reminded me, and I impart this about my wife because, as you know, my wife was critically ill. She's been having chronic issues for the last 8 years. And when she was on her deathbed, before we found out what was truly wrong with her to try, we came across someone who had a GoFundMe. And you know, she's like, well, we need to give them $50. And I'm like, I'm just fucking trying to keep you alive. And she goes, I don't care. We need to give them, you know, $50. So here I am, you know, writing out a GoFundMe form to help this other person while she's on her literal deathbed. And
Says so much about your bride, brother.
but that moment changed me dramatically because of that magnanimous heart that she still had for others. And I can imagine that changed you forever as well, because of the magnanimous heart that you found out others had for you.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is just like the anger, all of that stuff was really hidden to me for a long time. You know, I went into a place of survival. But yes, the answer is true. I mean, people ask me today, they're like, why do you do all that you do? Why do you focus in the community and do all the fundraising that you do? Why do you work with so many nonprofits? Why are you constantly speaking to try to, like, because I know it's possible, right? Like, I know what's possible, and I know that to whom much is given, much is expected. And I don't mean that like it's an expectation. It's actually become a privilege for me. Right. But that's also been a dynamic and a shift that I've had to change from, because I was a fighter for a lot of my life. I identified with this concept of fighting. I had to fight to get everything, fight to get attention, fight to have everything done. And this started early because, bro, when I come out of the hospital, I had a teddy bear in between my arm. And I got very used to people asking me questions like, hey, what happened to you? And they were expecting me to say something like, oh, my brother and I were racing down the street and I just crashed, man. Or, man, I flew off the jungle gym, or, right? But I would look at them deadpan in the eye and I'd say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. Now, after I got used to seeing them pick their jaws up off the floor, immediately what would happen is they would pause and they'd turn. They'd look at my parents or whatever adult I was with for validation, which told me they didn't believe my story. They didn't believe my truth. And I remember that vividly, like, wait a minute, I'm sitting here literally telling you the truth. Yeah. And 9 out of 10 times I'm having to justify and defend it.
Right.
Right. Everyone has felt like that in their life in some form or fashion, where they're trying to advocate for themselves, speak their truth, speak their reality, yet it's not being received. It needs external validation. Right. Yeah. And so we don't feel seen. We don't feel understood. So what did I do? I started to retreat into myself, because those same people put a second narrative on me. It was all of a sudden viewing me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, and immediately limiting me. All the things Brian's never going to be able to do again. And man, it's such a shame he's not going to have these physical experiences. And I, frankly, remember early, though these weren't the words I said at the time, this was the feeling I associate with the words now, which was, fuck that.
Right.
But what happened as a result of it? I protected myself so much that I disconnected myself. I'll explain the concept of the human experience in a little bit, but I'll tell you what I mean when I say that right now. I created a mental narrative because I was told if you have a mindset, you've got mental toughness, nothing can stop you. Right? So what did that mean? Brian created a narrative that was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And by the way, I fucking did a lot of epic shit to prove the world wrong, but really I was proving myself wrong. Yeah. But here's the narrative everyone else added. Oh, and by the way, if Brian needs help, he'll ask for it. I wake up 20 years old after pushing the limits of my life, because my rush threshold is now up here, and I've got to be on the border of death just to feel alive half the time. And I'm snowboarding and I go down and my arm snaps. Right? I break it again. I almost lost it. I'll save all of the bare middle there, but here's the reality. That got into the deepest, darkest, one of the most depressed periods of time. I put on 40 pounds in 10 months. I went
Wow.
through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of the medical malpractice of the complications of 20 years ago, right? And all of the ripple effects of what that had in my life. And here's what I realized. I was a little angry then in the very beginning because no one was there, even though I was surrounded by people. I was alone.
Yep.
And here's the reality. I'm not mad at them at all. I also accepted and surrendered to the fact that they just bought into my narrative, which was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. But I didn't have the courage in one of my most vulnerable periods in my adult life to ask for help when I needed it the most. And so that's when I really started to recognize that what I thought was my transformation story at age 7 wasn't. That's the story that created all the trash that I started to bury, because when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain, mental pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years and didn't even know it.
Wow.
Right. And so now I'm in a place where I'm known as the garbage man in many circles because I'm helping people identify and remove the trash from their past that continues to show up as their biggest problems in life, business, relationships, and health. And we help them through our waste to wealth method identify how to eliminate the waste in yourself, in your business, to maximize the wealth and growth opportunities that can exist. And so that's how I view the world: is how are we growing? How are we refining? How are we extracting the lessons? How are we getting the reps to continually become the best versions of who we are? And when we can connect to all of who we are, which I'll talk about in a minute, man, life can become unlimited.
So because you're married with a couple children now, at what point did you meet your wife?
I met my wife my junior year of college. And what's funny about that is I met her when, like, right before my rebroken arm, and then almost every interaction I had with her was with a broken arm until we started dating. And man, it was just beautiful. So yeah, she and I've been together for 17 years.
So she got to see you in your survival mode, in your fight mode, and then in your pissed off anger mode. And you've managed 17 years. That's a testament to how powerful your wife is. Let's be clear.
She's unbelievable.
No,
but I mean, there's truth to what
you
you
just said. Get in our own way.
There's so much truth to what you just said. I mean, here's the reality, and this is what we haven't gotten to yet. You know, when you bury all this trash and you hide behind yourself and you're disconnecting yourself, there's a lot of intellectual and emotional narratives that get created that cause us to react in moments, right? Those are that's the trash from your past. It's those trigger moments that are conditioned by your emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. I have not met too many people who would argue on the point that I have a very strong personality, right? Like, you laugh. You've known me just a little bit, and you're like, yeah, no, I know that about myself, right? And so the reality of it is here's the truth. I knew I was going to marry my wife on our first date because she was the first woman I was ever with that pushed back. And I actually ended lots of relationships with people prior because I didn't like who I was becoming because of the power dynamic. And it wasn't, I was trying to fight against it, but it was just, if it wasn't someone who was strong in themselves, it was never going to work.
Right.
And she was. And yeah, I dealt with a lot of shame for a lot of years that impacted my business and my relationship, that also brought up anger that was buried so deep it could barely be excavated. And, you know, the truth is I brought out all the biggest parts of me on her. There were times when I felt disconnected, isolated, and alone in our marriage, where I just thought that she was weak, that she like didn't have it together, right? But it would show up in moments like this where she'd say, hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? And my shame lens would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently. So what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? Which would cause the reaction of anger to bubble up, my chest to puff. And all of a sudden I'd rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to fucking show her that I'm a good husband and father, when that wasn't even what she asked.
Right.
Right. My wife challenged me to step out of my old brick and mortar business. We built and scaled a $15 million risk management employee benefits consulting business. We were set, we were doing things well, but she also knew that I was dying inside every day I existed there. And I wasn't having the impact on the world that I wanted and what she believed my potential was. So she helped reflect back to me in a time for me to see myself the way she saw me, which was a gift.
Yep.
And what's crazy about that is 10 months later, we executed our buy sell, left that other business. And within a year of me being out with the sole purpose of helping people get to the core of who they are and live their best lives, my wife sits on the back patio, literally 9 months after that, and goes on to tell me that things I'd done early in our relationship, ways that I'd shown up, ways I was still showing up, had contributed to her losing who she was. It was a dagger to the heart. But that's when we unpacked the anger. That's when we started to really, really remove. And, you know, we've focused now so much on repair, neutralizing and diffusing, unwinding intellectual and emotional narratives, and identifying where it connects and converts in our relationship and within our business, and where and how we can apply the lessons. But I like to say we've been together for 17 years, but my wife has only felt emotionally safe with me for maybe 12 to 18 months.
Oh, wow.
And that says a lot, which when I used to believe that she was weak, I'm happy that you said it, man. That's got to be a strong woman, because for someone to put up with me for as long as she has and do it day in and day out and be able to check me, be able to derail me, be able to hold herself alongside me, there's not many people that are strong enough to endure that. And I'm deeply grateful.
Yeah, and I'm able to recognize that because I do have it in my own marriage and my own wife. And I know this from being a hurt, angry person for most of my life. We need a strong person in our lives to be able to call us on our bullshit, and not call us on our bullshit in a nagging way, but in a loving, compassionate way that helps us actually deal with our bullshit, instead of playing the narrative, oh, this is just who I am, get used to it. That's fucking bullshit, and that's cowardice. And I figured that out for myself by my wife being the strong person to be able to give me the same pushback.
But I completely agree. I mean, here's the reality. Anybody who is in your life who's not challenging you towards what you're capable of and who they see you to be, but not keeping you accountable, not holding you in place, not bringing things to your awareness, that either says one or two things. Either they don't actually love you to the level that they do, or they don't believe that you can change. Either one, lean into those people that are actually outlining a path, because we don't grow without a little bit of resistance. Right. And we don't grow without that outside awareness. And we need someone to hold us in our power and potential and accountability within that, because otherwise we fall down to the lowest common denominator of what anyone around us will be willing to accept. And that's not the standard I choose to live my life by. And that's not what I teach. We teach, how do you show love, grace, empathy, and compassion, and lift people up and bring them along? Don't shame and blame them. Don't tell them what they can't do. Help uncover what is possible, because that's what everybody wants anyway.
Are you old enough to remember the biodome?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an interesting thing because it ties into what you just said. In the biodome, when they were trying to find this utopia of climate for people to live and how they would react in all this utopia, they discovered that the trees would only grow to a certain height and then they'd topple over. And after studying it further, they discovered that in this utopia, what they forgot was the wind. And the resistance of the wind was what made the roots grow stronger in those trees to withstand everything. And without the resistance, they would only grow to a certain height and topple over. And I think that's very true for our lives as well. We need some resistance to grow from. Now, it doesn't have to consume all of our lives to be our life, but without that, we get to a certain height and we topple over.
Yeah, I think we as a people, as a being, get into rhythms around boredom that then take away our creativity and our natural spark, right? We fall into the seduction of success in some ways, or the ease of life because we can. But to your point, I think that's what I always pay attention to. And that's where, frankly, one of our other concepts came from, you know, this idea of embracing pain to avoid suffering, right? I mean, to your point, exactly, like resistance is going to happen in our lives one way or another. I think we get to choose the extremity of that resistance, and where and how is that resistance producing returns for us versus taking us backwards. And so this is really important to understand, because the shame and blame of like, oh man, I should have gotten up earlier today to go to the gym. Oh man, I should have eaten less yesterday or last night for dinner. Oh man, I should have, whatever. Should is a shame-based word and implies that whatever you're doing, whoever you are, it's not good enough. But if we look at this concept, I think this will be a good one for people to understand. Right? We need to understand the concept of pain and the narratives around pain. What does the world tell us? Reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs, right? It's literally what's taught, preached, advocated. See commercials, you hear it it's everywhere, right? Like, hey, get to the ease of life. Yeah, but let's do it through shortcuts and numbing and not actually doing what needs to be done, right? Now, I want to give one big disclaimer on that. I'm a big believer that there are certain medications, certain treatments, certain pathways that are bridges to get you where you need to go. I'm not vilifying that at all. It's the narrative around just numb everything, just escape pain, right? Pain's defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. Then what do? We further complicate it with adjectives like acute and chronic. Now, acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies that it persists after the direct cause is removed, right? And for an undetermined period of time. So we don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. But most of what we call chronic pain is self-induced suffering, right? And so what does this concept look like? Well, I can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains from a sedentary lifestyle and not being able to play with my grandkids when I'm 70, right? I can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid being stuck in a loveless marriage that's never going to end, or frankly, being trapped in a marriage that I want out of. I can embrace the pain of the fit my kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back. Right? As a business owner, I can embrace the pain of firing my top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth because they were the greatest cancer in our culture and they drove away all of our other top talent. Right? The concept of pain versus suffering is really important because that's why we believe people need to not just look at their goals, their dreams, their aspirations, but acknowledge the suffering that they wish to avoid. Because ultimately, then we can get to the identifying of the pains that we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them as a path to our success. Because here's the reality. I genuinely believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us. Absolutely. I'd rather have influence and control over my path and destiny and know that what I'm choosing in terms of resistance will produce an ROI versus just dead activity that's going to lead me nowhere.
Absolutely. And so you said that when you rebroke your arm, that's when the real transformation happened. What did and you also said that you did some epic shit, and I believe that because you were out to prove the world wrong. What did that 15 to 20-year-old Brian look like versus the man that's in front of me now?
Yeah. You know, I would tell you that the 15 to 20-year-old version is somebody that still had some center, still had some elements of who you see in me now. What I would tell you is that this is my most authentic version I've ever been. And it's not that I'm a different version. It's just that I finally have shed so many layers that I can be seen very, very openly. Okay. And so my 15 to 18-year-old self, 20-year-old self was carrying a lot of armor, right? And armor protects pain. I always say armor protects pain, but boundaries are a communicated contract that exists based on our clear existence. I didn't have clear existence at that time. I was on the path starting to lose who I was, but I was involved in philanthropy. I was involved in doing a bunch of things pre-college. And then I kind of found my way in college, and post-college, post this injury, I really lost myself, like deeply, right?
Did you turn to drugs and alcohol?
Alcohol was involved. I would say that I was not big into drug use because I've always known I have an addictive personality. And so, you know, I've, for example, stayed away from cocaine like the plague because I'm pretty convinced that I'd fucking love it and I would want to be on it all the time from everything I've heard about it. So I'm like, I just won't touch it. But what I mean is here's the reality. When I was isolated and alone, I started to realize how disconnected, lonely, and isolated I really was. And it started to make me look at the human experience differently. Okay. So the human experience, I believe we all seek and desire four things. Okay. We all seek and desire to feel safe. We all seek and desire to feel protected. We all seek and desire to feel seen and understood. And we all seek and desire to feel connected. Now, these last two are the two we want most, but they don't happen unless the first two do. Right. So here's the reality. I get all this criticism, all this judgment, all these belief systems layered on top of me on what I'm not going to be able to do, who I'm going to be predetermined to be, what my life is going to look like, which created all this associated armor because it didn't make me feel seen and understood. It didn't make me feel connected. So I didn't feel safe and protected. So I armored up. Now, for the sake of this analogy, are you familiar with what a 35-gallon black trash bag looks like for those outdoor bins?
Yep.
Okay. Imagine unfolding one into this square, but don't open it up and do it. Now, hold one corner in each hand out in front of you. Okay. And I want you to just imagine this for a second. This is your armor. Okay. Now, I want you to tell me, how can you properly expect that anyone will see you, understand you, know who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your boundaries, all of your value, and all of what your heart says delivered through an opaque force field? And that's assuming, by the way, that they aren't carrying their own armor that's going to further dilute the message. Right. So what had I done? I'd created an intellectual narrative that Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. But all that was intellectual armor because I wasn't actually feeling. right? I'd given this narrative that I didn't need therapy. I didn't need to process the emotional stuff. My brother did, but I didn't. Mine was just physical, according to everybody, right? But the reality of it is I didn't feel in the areas that I needed to heal for years. So when I got disconnected, isolated, and alone, I decided, hey, I'm going to go into vulnerability and authenticity because I believe that's the glue that binds human connection. But here's the problem, brother. I was still in seek of who, and I didn't have a healthy model for it. So the next 7 years were me chasing the only outline I had from the world, which was to chase the what? What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success. And here's the reality. By age 27, I had it all. We had a $10 million business at that time. I have a beautiful wife that followed me from college. We've got kids that are coming on the way, nice houses, nice cars, nice everything. But I realized that in the chase of what, because it was the only model I had, it actually cost me who I was. And at 27, that was the realization was, man, the path that I've been on, I've always said that I'm doing this for the benefit of my family, that I really want to be able to grow and protect them. And I want to do these things, but I'm making all this money and running in circles of people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, and 8 figures. And I wasn't the only one that was disconnected, isolated, and alone, which got me thinking there's got to be a different way. So I hired my first coach. So that was the beginning of me starting to unpack.
So let me ask you this, because it's, we see all these celebrities, we see all these high, famous people, lots of money, lots of fame, exterior joy on their face, things that you can probably relate to. What prevented you from doing what they did, which was checking out?
Oh, I did check out.
No.
Until 27.
You're still here, so you didn't check out.
Oh, you mean I didn't take myself out of the equation?
Correct.
I want to be really, really careful with how I answer this question, because what I want to first acknowledge is I've lost a lot of people to suicide.
Yep.
I've lost a lot of people who've taken their own life. And I want to be really, really clear. It in no way is a weakness in my mind. I believe that when the suffering has gotten that great that it's the only alternative, we need to have grace and empathy for even those people who cannot see another option. So I have to give that disclaimer before I answer my own question.
Well, and I appreciate that, because as someone who's attempted suicide several times in my own life, I understand that disclaimer, but it still begs the question, what kept you here?
I always felt like I was destined for something bigger, and I couldn't understand it, but I believed that I needed to stay attached to it. And this is something that I believed even pre-accident. It's interesting because when my accident happened, my 2nd grade teacher, my 3rd grade teacher, my 4th grade teacher all said to my mom, hey, I think that Brian caught a brush of death and he's on this path to take over the world. And she said, no, he's been like that since the day he came out.
That's awesome.
Right. Here's what I think is true for me. And this is what I could always settle into, even though I felt isolated, disconnected, and alone. I just always believed that I was put here for a reason. And I believed that I had a bigger calling, and I believed that with enough time, I would find it. But what's also interesting is, to be perfectly honest with you, in some of my most miserable periods in my life, I was so armored, I was blind to how much I was suffering as well.
Oh, wow.
And I think had I actually been in a position to allow myself to feel it, I'm not sure I would still be here, because there were some dark times that I really couldn't feel because I had not learned to be in touch with my emotions and in my body. And so I don't think that it's weakness in any way. It never crossed my mind. I believed that there was something else, but I also just always had this connection to, I didn't lose my arm. I have this crazy story. And though I never wanted my story to be what I was known for, I knew it would be associated with me. And I think I just always had this belief that at some point this story was going to become purposeful, and that I was going to have an ability to have an impact on people in a way that I couldn't envision. I got lost though, right? I got lost in those 7 years in particular. And I was in that period of life, because of where I was at and what I was doing, I was drinking a lot. Though I wouldn't have considered myself an alcoholic, I probably would have fit the definition at times. My self-discipline was so high that whenever I felt like it was becoming a need, I would shut it off, right? Which again was further perpetuating my control, which was keeping me alive and making me feel safe, right? But I was the guy that never felt comfortable in a shirt and tie, because any shirt off the rack, I still have to alter to fit my body. My shoulders are different sizes. My arms are different sizes. I don't have a lat on the left side of my back, so my back is curved. Every sport coat, every long sleeve thing would pull. It would make me feel uncomfortable, and I would feel like I had to. And so what did I do? I decided at that point, well, the only way I can show up is if I'm getting custom suits. But custom suits went from one that was going to fit me really well that I could wear to a purchasing problem of all of a sudden I've got like 10, $3,500 sport coats in my closet. Why? I don't fucking know, right? Because I looked good. And I think my unconscious at the time had ego, which ego is armor and ego is self-protection. Ego is all intellectual. But I think my unconscious was like, hey, if I build a life of significance, a life that people admire, maybe people will just want to be around me. You see, I was still in seek of who, I was doing it through the what. And that's what allowed me to realize the breakdown of this. And I just never really considered another alternative, because once I lived through this, like I almost died. I almost died more than once. I almost died on the operating table a couple of times because they clipped something that they weren't supposed to. I almost lost my arm 2 other times because of a surgical issue, right? Like legitimately, I mean, there was so many things that could have gone wrong. I didn't survive for no reason.
Yeah, when you originally said that you were destined for more, my entire body lit up from head to toe in goosebumps, like bang. I know that was your purpose. And you didn't come this far just to be this far. When you originally were making your money, what field was that in?
Risk management, employee benefits consulting. So it's insurance, for lack of a better term, business corporate insurance.
So how does Brian go from a multimillionaire in insurance to Brian serving the world by being a fantastic speaker and coach?
What started that transition?
Yeah.
So I told you that I hired my first coach not long after that time. The thing that I left out that I really want to just reinforce on this is, and by the way, it just blanked from my head again. So I'm going to just keep freestyling because it'll come back to me when it's supposed to. I'm one of those that surrenders to like, well, I'm not going to force what it is.
Yeah.
But I hired a coach, and the first coach that I hired within a month of working with him was like, Brian, you got to be doing this. I was like, doing what? He goes, you help people every day. You're always speaking life into people. You've got really good at sound advice. You've helped scale multiple nonprofits. You've helped scale multiple businesses. You're always coaching people. You're always speaking. Why wouldn't you get paid for it? Right. And I literally, this is what I said to him. I was like, yeah, whatever, dude. I'm paying you a lot of money to help me figure out these other things, not add something else to my plate. So fuck off. Like literally, I was like, fuck off. Like, stop. Like,
right.
But he trickled it every month for 9 months to a year. Every month, Brian, have you considered leaning? No, I'm not there. No, I'm not there yet. And there was just something that happened about a year later. There was this string of 30 days that the universe sent me so many signs I couldn't refuse it. Right. Every time I look back on it, it makes me laugh because I feel like it's a crazy, crazy story. Like I have a hard time believing it was even real. But literally every day for about 30 days, it was 30 or 31 days, I got a message, a text message, a phone call, an email, a DM, something from someone in my life saying, thank you. Thank you for the impact. Thank you for that piece of advice. Thank you. Like out of the blue, no way that this was a coincidence, right? Like, and so a month in, I decided I needed to figure out if this was going to be complementary or conflicting to the path that I'm on. And that was the beginning of it. So I founded the company 5 years before I executed my buy, sell, and the other. And I was coaching and speaking alongside it that whole time. It was 2019, though, that my wife and I went away on that weekend. I alluded before that she helped me stand in this moment, but we were heading back from this weekend after being mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, like just bonded, like one that weekend. You know what I'm talking about? Like
I do.
There's
Yeah.
special moments with your partner and spouse that just, you can't put words to.
Right.
And as we're going back to pick up our kids, she goes, how would you feel if you didn't go to the office on Monday morning? I paused. I laughed. I was like, hey, honey, that's a pretty loaded question. Why don't you tell me more? While inside, I'm flooding in my fear, drowning in my doubt, swirling in my shame. Like, where the fuck is she going with this?
Right.
She goes on to tell me basically like, hey, I think you're scratching the surface of your potential. I think you're miserable. I think, we're not anywhere near the impact we want to have. And she goes, and one bet I know I'll make every day is betting on Brian Bogert, because every time we do, we win. And she goes, so I don't care if we live in a cardboard box on the corner. We need 100% of you, and we don't have it. Right. And what she did was give me the push to give me permission to actually pursue it as a potential, right? Which I hadn't really done seriously to that point. And it was 3 months later, after I unpacked my shame, really got clear on what was holding me back, did a 7-year cash flow projection to really make sure that I could understand what we were looking at, what this would mean, and communicated to my president and my business partners 3 months later that I'd be leaving at the end of the fiscal year. So it was 10 months from the time she said something to me to the time that I was out. And all she did was point me towards where I was already headed. It just would have taken me a lot longer to find it. And had she not, I maybe would have lost her and the kids in the pathway anyway.
I'm smiling so brightly because I think your wife and I are sisters, even though we've never met them. Like I hear a lot of my wife in your wife, and you know, it's pretty cool. So you took this leap of faith again, you crushed it again, and you still weren't unarmored, if I'm tracking the timeline right.
Yeah, you are.
So what was the conduit or the synergy thing that got you to finally drop the armor and just be you?
So I have to be clear that there are still moments that I have to focus on dropping armor, because I think that it's cellular and we have reactionary moments and conditioning that will carry with us forever.
Yeah,
but largely the shift was that conversation with my wife on the back patio. It went from a month earlier, us believing that we were in the best place in our marriage we'd ever been at 14 years at that point. And we were, that was the truth. We unpacked something that led to about 6 weeks of a lot of discomfort. And then it led to this conversation. And this conversation was literally kind of like, we're putting it all out on the table. And it went from believing that I was in the best place in my marriage to like, oh, we're going to be working on some stuff, to having to accept in that moment that if I don't make a dramatic change, I might not be married in another 30 days. You know, here's the reality that tested the thing that I say is the only thing binary into my world. Right. And when I say that, it's that my wife and my kids are the only thing binary in my world, meaning if they're not good, I'll walk away from everything else I'm doing. My actions did not always support that, but they continued to align and were more and more and more in congruence. But I was blind to the reality of this anger because, like I said, it was buried so deep, like I didn't even know it was there. But in that moment, I could have reacted. I could have done the normal thing, but I didn't. That was pure surrender in that moment, not fighting. My wife was so strong, so clear, so articulate, advocating for herself in a way that she hadn't in a long time because I hadn't made her feel she could. And I saw a glimmer of the woman that I married, not the woman that I was starting to make hide behind more and more armor herself. And it was that moment. I handed her my phone and I said, sweetie, I want you to clear my calendar for the next 10 days. I don't want this phone. You keep it for the next 10 days. Anybody who texts, emails, whatever, like field it or don't respond, whatever you want. But I need to do everything in my power to figure this out and figure this out quickly, because I made a promise to her that day that I was going to do everything in my power to ensure that the negative effects of anger wouldn't affect the house as a result of me again, knowing that I'm human and knowing that it would. But I'm proud to say in 2.5 years now since that's happened, it only happened about 5 or 6 times. And it's not happened in maybe 9 months to a year. My kids don't even remember their dad angry anymore, which has been a really big win and a huge, huge, huge shift and relief for me, is having them even articulate that. But I had to do some really deep work. I had to go unpack things that I hadn't looked at before. I was given some gifts in that next period of time that pointed me towards some of it. But then, man, it's been a lot of putting myself in the moment and a lot of heavy lifting. It took about 12 to 18 months before we found a rhythm. It took 6 months. I was eating shit every day, meaning like I created the issue, right? I'm the big, loud energy. I'm the scary one. I'm the man in the house. Like I'm setting the tone. So now I can't react at all. I've got to like bite my tongue in every moment. I have to restrain, because what am I trying to do? I'm trying to build back trust and establish that the pattern will be different. I'm trying to make my wife feel emotional safety, physical safety, mental safety, right? Spiritual safety, and be able to know that like her partner there is real time. There'd be many moments, right, that she'd say something as simple as that, what are we gonna do with the kids this weekend? And I'd feel the reaction and I'd have to pause in that moment, knowing she was my advocate, and say, hey, honey, I don't think I heard you correctly because I felt myself get triggered. So could you please restate that one more time? And hopefully I can hear it through a more neutral lens. But if I can't, maybe we can pause and revisit this later, right? Like I had to minimize and shorten the amount of damage and amplify the amount of repair as quickly as possible, and to figure out the patterns of how it was moving in my body, how it was moving through my world, and so I could move through it. But I ate shit for 6 months, and then my wife woke up and said, hey, I think it's time that I do some work. Right. And then it was another 6 to 12 months of us doing work together and by ourselves. And it's now been about a year of like really good consistency. And I would tell you the last 6 months, I now exist in a relationship that I've always dreamed of, but I was starting to believe wasn't possible. And the level of intimacy, the level of trust, the level of emotional safety, our partnership all in and all out. It's funny. My wife didn't really want to be involved in any of our businesses until she felt emotional safety in the home.
Mm-hmm.
When she felt emotional safety in the home, she's come in and she's kicking ass as one of the best operators and integrators I've ever met. And she just does it like it's every other day for her, right? When she's managing 2 special needs kids and all of my deficiencies and like, and so it took a lot, but here's what I know now. I know it's possible. And I know now that anyone who has deep, deep, deep levels of anger, deep, deep, deep levels of shame is suffering. They are disconnected. They are isolated. They are alone. And any one of you who's listening to this, you might believe it's not possible. I'm showing you by the example that I'm setting what is possible, because many people have said, what? You've done what? Yeah, we've also limited grandparents from seeing our kids because they've crossed boundaries that questioned emotional safety. And now it's not our job to protect our parents, it's our job to protect our kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've had to understand boundaries and navigating, but you can't do that when you're hiding behind armor.
Right.
And so it just took a lot of work for my wife and I to feel safe with each other again. You know, like I said, she only has felt emotional safety, but again, we've been together for 17 years. We hid from each other for 14 of them.
Yeah.
And then we wondered why we didn't have the marriage that we wanted.
Well, even that's a testament that you stayed together behind the pain and the armor. I mean, that still shows real strength and dedication, because a lot of people would check out of that too.
It does.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting to me because, like, I consider I've been a coach for 40 years. It's only been in the last 4 years that I put a label to it.
Yeah.
Like you have been helping, like your coach told you, and so it's interesting to me that we as people can help so many other people and see them blossom and watch them grow, and we still stand in our own fucking way to help ourselves and get out of our own problems.
Yeah.
We have the tools, we know the things, there's still an element there that.
But here's the reality. We all have blind spots.
Yeah.
Right. And here's the truth. In these moments of reaction, like there's actual science to support it. It's cellular memory, right? There's over 40,000 cells in the heart that are called sensory neurites, and they're brain-like cells that carry cellular memory. And they've actually studied and shown that if you go to therapy, for example, and you just intellectually process the patterns of your past alone, and you don't allow it to penetrate, to actually be felt in that 18-inch journey between the head and the heart, to actually understand what's going on in the body, to get in there, to feel it, to sit with it, to unpack it, that you can talk about it all day long, but unless those 40,000 cells embody it, you won't heal. Right. And that's, by the way, something I've said for years. If you don't feel, you don't heal. Right. I know this because when I shut off physical pain, again, I shut off all the other kinds of pain. I didn't feel anything. And that was one of the first things that I realized when I started to realize that I was shut off to emotion. I told you that I was looking at human connection through vulnerability and authenticity. Right. But human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And I was operating on human connection largely intellectually. Right. I didn't understand all that I was unconsciously actively suppressing on a day-to-day basis. And so my current reality can only pair up to what I'm actually seeing. But it's no wonder, because the world will never judge you based on your intent.
Right.
The world will always judge you based on your actions. And it's those moments that we're carrying armor, that we're blind to ourselves, that we react in a moment, that our intent might be one thing, but how it's received by everybody else is a whole nother. And then we wonder why we're not ever understood. We're not even delivering a clear message because we're delivering it through armor.
Yep.
And so when we start to realize that it's our own blind spots that can keep us trapped most, I don't understand why anybody wouldn't be like, show me where the fuck to flip open my lid and jump inside my can right now so that I can unpack it all. Like for me, if I know it's my biggest problems and connected to every pattern I ever have, by the way, every time that's been true. If I have boundary issues in relationships, it shows up in my business, it shows up in my family, it shows up in my extended family, it shows up with my friends, right? It shows up with my clients. So if I don't have a good boundary issue because I'm suffering from shame, that's something I would want to understand, because it's limiting me, right? So for me, I'm consistently trying to get feedback from outside lenses because I just told you 2 times, one from a coach, one from my wife, where they saw me more clearly than I saw me. And had they not pointed that to me, I might not have walked the path.
Yeah, go ask 5 people that you know how they see you and what they view of you, and you'll get a very interesting perspective outside of, if they're willing to be honest and truthful, outside of what your own vision of that is. And as far as the heart thing goes, I have a coaching friend, and she does Thai massage, and she calls it issues in the tissues, and she can literally tell on which side of your body your issues are coming from, and she can actually feel how they're impacting your skeletal structure. And
there's truth to all of
release that, you actually can get a whole new body by releasing all that shit.
Well, what's crazy too is that here's the reality. Our bodies actually regenerate 100% of its cells every 7 years.
Yep.
Right? We legitimately are cellularly a different person, which goes to show that it's only what we're unconsciously or consciously carrying forward that will continue to repeat as our cycles do. Right? But we can be our own person. And then to your point exactly, our body always points us at what's important if we're paying attention. And it might sound like abstract, esoteric, a little woo for some people, but legitimately, every single time I can understand the patterns of my body, how the emotions are moving through, where pain might be showing up, where tension might be showing up, isolating and removing, breathing out tension, like you can change everything. But something as simple as like 2 weeks ago, there was something that flared up in my life, something that flared up in my karmic. Bro, I went to bed one night, totally fine, woke up the next morning and my right eye it was a shiner. I had a black eye the next morning. No explanation, but I know that I was feeling some different energy that day that didn't quite make sense. And I was not really sure where it came from. Again, might sound woo, might sound crazy, but I have a meditation and consciousness coach, and we do interpretations and downloads daily based on biorhythms, aura scans, and other indicators to allow me to know where I'm at in my normal rhythm. Okay. But as we were doing this, it ultimately pointed within 24 hours to a concept that's an Egyptian term called the Eye of Ra, which was around anger, aggression, and fear inhibited through this. And I was dealing with some things in a couple of male relationships in my life that were very indicative of the indication of the Eye of Ra. Why did I get a black eye? No idea. There was no impact. I could push on it. It didn't hurt. Nothing. But it was bruised. It was noticeable. It was real. And again, I could just chalk that up to nothing, or I can recognize that my body's pointing me towards what's important, pay attention to it, and try to figure out what the connecting factor is.
Well, I love when people think that it's woo, because if they actually study it enough, it's actually science. And,
I agree.
I always say that my practice is where the woo meets the work, because like you can do these esoterical thoughts, but if you don't do any of the work, nothing will happen. As we kind of wrap this up, and we could talk for hours because you're awesome. By the time this airs, we'll be leaning towards 2024. So what does 2024 look like for Brian and your family?
Yeah, well, though I look into the future, I also try to put myself as much in the present as possible. So I'll answer that through both lenses. In the present, what we're currently working on is building a solution that finally has brought together my 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur and my 10 years of experience in digital marketing and on a social media type platform, and bringing it together to really be able to show people how to transform their waste to wealth and why it's so important to connect and convert in their world. And so what we're building right now, we've redone our whole home studio. We are going to be running a series of events that start in August that will be going every single month, that at a high volume, people will be able to understand how we're doing this. And we're finally launching one of our signature programs around this method that I'm the inventor of, and we've deployed now through so many different organizations. So I genuinely feel with every cell in my body that we're getting ready to strap ourselves onto a rocket ship. And I don't mean that to impress. I don't mean that like, oh, all the money. We've been chasing impact of over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. And this vehicle that we're building right now is going to allow us to do that at an exponentially larger rate and impact more lives. And so I think we're going to be further into alignment in our life. Our kids are going to be more and more a part of our events because they're already starting to coach people like when we're at events. And we are just really trying to live our lives as a model of what's possible. and a model of what a marriage, a household, a business, and really living life on your terms can look like. I don't want people to model after me. I want to teach them the ways to go build their lives for them, scale their businesses for them. And so 2024, I think it's just all coming together right now. I think we'll be a year further into that impact and living further down our purpose and impacting more lives, like, and doing it collectively, because that's what I care about.
And we'll be sure to put some links so people can, reach out and connect with you to be a part of some of that. If there is somebody listening who can resonate with anything that either of us have said, what would your 30-plus-year-old Brian, who's now being fully seen, what would they advise them?
Somebody just asked me this the other day, and I answered the question very, very clearly. And for whatever reason in this moment, when you asked it as 30-year-old self instead of 20-year-old self, it changed for me. I think my 30-year-old self would tell me to lean as far and as deep into me and in the relationships that are most meaningful to me as possible. I genuinely think that deep, deep level of connection that exists with elements of safety and being seen in all the categories of who we are is what allows us to be free and live to our potential. And I don't know that I fully appreciated how powerful these relationships and connections and depth can be, because I was so limited and operating on the surface. And so I would, now I exist in a state where I say that anything lacks depth doesn't interest me. So I would tell my 30-year-old self to seek more depth.
I love that. And because we are both warriors with a warrior spirit, what does that mean to Brian Bogert?
Man, a warrior spirit is the ability to know who you are, to be able to love yourself, to be able to advocate for yourself. Because I believe if you can do that, then you can love others and you can advocate and protect others. And so a warrior spirit is somebody who has what I call a strong spine and a soft front. Strong spine, meaning they know who they are, they know what they offer, they know what they're worth, they know their value, they know what they're willing to do and not willing to do. They know the impact they're going to leave on the world, so they can be unwavering in that wind, just like those big trees. Right. But a soft front is I've dropped the armor, because when someone needs me to be soft, needs me to be gentle, they don't have to lay their head down on a metal chest piece. Right. That's what allows me to become the protector and connector in my life. And I think that everyone with a warrior spirit is a protector and a connector. So where are you protecting yourself that's limiting you from protecting others?
Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite definitions that I've heard. It has truly been an honor for me to share this hour with you. And I just thank you profusely for your time. You're a great human being, and I'm glad to call you a friend. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for following your call to create something to put good stories into the world, because without that, I wouldn't have a place to come talk to you. So my friend, I appreciate you. Keep showing up with the heart that you do. And let me know how I can support you.
I appreciate it. You have a blessed evening.
You too.